On the weekend of July 22nd, Star Trek Beyond opened in most locations around the world. In the US, it opened at number 1, easily dethroning the previous week's holdovers and pushing Ghostbusters down to an embarrassing 4th spot, which we will get back to at length in another video. At first glance, this number 1 opening might seem like a solid win for Star Trek Beyond, especially given the production troubles it was subject to. However, I doubt anyone in Paramount were doing any backflips over that win, as Star Trek Beyond opened 10.6 million lower than the previous movie Star Trek Into Darkness, which itself opened 9 million lower than the 2009 launch of the modern Star Trek. The trend seems to be that each new Star Trek movie nets the studio less profit than the previous one, which is the exact opposite of the trend the studio would have liked. Still, they can't be too worried, can they? Seeing as the 4th movie was announced on July 18th, before Star Trek Beyond even opened. Of course, as we should have learned from Green Lantern and Fantastic Four, among many others, announcing sequels before a given movie opens isn't the same as actually following through after the numbers are in. In this editorial, I will give my take on why each new Star Trek movie has earned less than the previous one, the production trouble behind Star Trek Beyond, what the box office might mean for the sequel prospects, what we know of Star Trek 4, and why the usual Hollywood rules of thumb don't quite apply the same way for Star Trek. Towards the end of the 90s and early 2000s, Star Trek had undeniably grown stale. After knocking it out of the park with First Contact in 1996, the Next Generation crew went from bad to worse on the big screen, while on the small screen, Voyager was running on fumes. Enterprise had promise, but like Voyager before it, it was on the wrong channel, and there were way too many mediocre episodes jammed in between the good ones. Just as the series had found its feet with seasons 3 and 4, it was cancelled, and so Star Trek Prime ended in 2005. Star Trek wasn't on hiatus for too long though. Just a couple of years later, work on a Star Trek reboot commenced. But this wasn't your average reboot which disrespectfully threw out everything that happened before with yesterday's trash. Star Trek was instead an in-continuity reboot where events from the post-Nemesis era of the Prime universe created a parallel universe and timeline, dubbed the Kelvin timeline, in which the new continuity is set. It was, in my opinion, a brilliant idea, and after an absolutely stellar marketing campaign, the Star Trek reboot opened to 79 million and went on to gross 385 million worldwide on a budget of 150 million. In addition to being the greatest financial success in Star Trek film history, the movie was also a hit with critics and moviegoers alike, despite a lot of older fans obviously having issues with it, let's not deny it. Even so, the brand was revitalized in a big way. Following the release of the reboot in 2009, the future of Star Trek looked very bright. Unfortunately, the filmmakers fumbled the ball pretty badly after that, giving the eventual title of the second movie, Star Trek Into Darkness, a whole new and unintentional meaning. Many moviegoers were left disappointed by Into Darkness and blame it for the brand losing much of the goodwill the reboot had earned. While there is no doubt a lot of truth in this, I think an even bigger issue was timing. Into Darkness was simply released too late. Immediately after the opening weekend numbers and reviews of the 2009 hit movie were in, the powers that be at Paramount should not only have requested that Bad Robot, the J.J. Abrams-led production company that oversees development of the Star Trek movies, to have a sequel ready for release as early as 2011, Paramount should have obliged them to have it ready absolutely no later than by 2012. While writers Orci, Kurtzman and Lindelof set to work fairly quickly, it would appear that between the writers and producers, they struggled to lock anything down. J.J. Abrams being busy making Super 8 didn't help matters either. A year and a half later, in December of 2010, Abrams told CinemaBlend that there still was no script, and a month after that, In January of 2011, he followed up that he still didn't know if he would direct or not, as he hadn't seen a script. But then, in the first quarter of 2011, things started happening. Paramount started financing pre-production in the spring of 2011. Orci told WonderCon audiences that the script had been completed in April of 2011, and in May of 2011, Abrams told MTV that he would turn his attention to Star Trek once Super 8 was finished. In the end, Star Trek Into Darkness was released in the summer of 2013, a full 4 years after the highly successful reboot. On several occasions, the filmmaker stated that they would rather have the movie be good instead of hitting a certain release date. That is a point of view I can get behind as a general thing, but there are sometimes other factors to consider. In the 4 years between the two movies, a lot of the momentum garnered by the 2009 movie had evaporated, and in my opinion, Into Darkness wasn't good enough to excuse that long a wait. If Into Darkness had come out in 2011, all else being equal, I do believe it would have been better received and earned a whole lot more than it did. Instead, the 5-year mission promised at the end of Star Trek in 2009 was still over the horizon when Into Darkness ended 4 years later. The frustrating thing here is that they didn't spend those 4 years actually making the movie. No, they were essentially dragging their feet the first 2 years before rushing it like there was no tomorrow and making the movie the last 2 years. If they had at least a story outline ready in advance, and if Abrams had found someone like Justin Lin to take over right away, since he was so adamant about doing Super 8, I see no reason why they couldn't have had a second movie ready for release in 2011 and a third movie ready in 2013 or 14. I think Star Trek would have been in a far better state than it currently is if they had. As it is, Into Darkness cost about 40 million more to make than its predecessor and grossed about 30 million less in the US. While Into Darkness grossed 100 million more internationally than the 2009 movie, this was offset by the decline in home media sales, meaning Into Darkness was ultimately far less profitable for its producers than its predecessor. The end result of this is that the pressure is on for Star Trek Beyond to deliver if there is to be a fourth movie. For the third Star Trek movie, Paramount actually were adamant that the movie couldn't take as long to produce as Into Darkness, and insisted on a 2016 release, to coincide with Star Trek's 50th anniversary. It was clear from day one that J.J. Abrams would not be directing the movie, as he was busy directing Star Wars The Force Awakens. On the writing side, Kurtzman left to write for Sony's defunct Spider-Man movies, while Robert Orci stayed on writing Star Trek. He would soon be joined by J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay. Orci would also lobby to direct the movie, and after talks with Rupert Wyatt and Joe Cornish didn't lead to anything further, Paramount offered him the director's chair in May of 2014. Robert Orci, producer, writer, and now director, handed in the first draft of the script in August of 2014. Paramount was never subject to a Sony hack, so we don't know the details of what transpired next. But clearly, Paramount were unhappy with Orci's take and script. So much so that Paramount, for all intents and purposes, scrapped everything developed up till then and started over. Robert Orci stepped down as director on December 5, 2014. He would also no longer write the movie, but would still get a producer credit, presumably of the in-name only kind. Somewhat surprisingly, Scott the actor Simon Pegg was tasked with writing a brand new script, alongside Doug Young. About why Paramount dumped Orci's script, Simon Pegg commented that Paramount felt it was a little bit too Star Trek-y. The Avengers, which is a pretty nerdy comic book supposedly niche thing, made $1.5 billion. Star Trek Into Darkness made $500 million, which is still brilliant, but it means that, according to the studio, there's still $1 billion worth of box office that don't go and see Star Trek, and they want to know why. On December 22nd, 2014, it was announced that Justin Lin of Fast and Furious fame had stepped in to direct Star Trek Beyond. Lin told Film Journal International that he hadn't sought out Star Trek, it was J.J. Abrams that contacted him. While not a hardcore fan, Lin told the publication that he had grown up with Star Trek and it was a part of him. So despite an extremely tight schedule, he accepted the challenge of doing the movie from scratch. His take was to deconstruct the franchise for its 50th anniversary and rebuild it in a way that would reaffirm why we've loved it for half a century. The movie was filmed between June and October of 2015, with reshoots adding a new character taking place in March of 2016. Because of these reshoots, which had fans worried, the total production cost of the movie ended up in the vicinity of $185 million, about the same as Star Trek Into Darkness. As mentioned earlier, Star Trek Beyond opened to $59 million in its domestic opening weekend, $10.6 million lower than Star Trek Into Darkness. My view is that while Into Darkness opened so much lower than the 2009 reboot because momentum was lost over the 4 years it took to bring the movie to the big screen, Star Trek Beyond opened lower than Into Darkness because that movie disappointed so many it all but eradicated any momentum left. While a $59 million opening is usually nothing to scoff at, it is at best okay for a movie that carries a $185 million price tag. Take away the 3D and IMAX price bumps and adjust for inflation, and the franchise is, attendance-wise, essentially back to where it was in the 80s and 90s, which isn't good enough for movies costing a whole lot more than Star Trek movies did back then. Despite favorable reviews and audience feedback, the movie earned just $24.7 million in its second weekend, a drop of 58.2%. By no means a disaster in a crowded marketplace, but decidedly not good either, and certainly a much worse drop than the studio had hoped. By contrast, the 2009 Star Trek dropped 43%, and Into Darkness dropped 46% in their respective second weekends. But that is not to say news are all bad. Traditionally, the Star Trek movies have not been all that popular internationally, outside of a few select markets like the UK and Germany. That changed with Star Trek Into Darkness, the first Star Trek movie to gross more internationally than domestically. How much of that international increase was down to the inclusion of Benedict Cumberbatch, the overall growth of the overseas market, or any international increase in the brand's popularity is hard to say. But regardless, Star Trek Beyond now has to continue that trend, as it is now clear that it will need a lot of international help to merely break even, let alone see a profit. We won't know the full story for some time yet, as due to a staggered international release schedule, the movie won't be released everywhere for months to come. But even in the bigger markets where it has opened so far, such as the UK, it has opened lower than Into Darkness. Already now, we can say that the chances of it being anything other than the least profitable modern Star Trek movie yet are slim to none. From the fan perspective, however, it only has to do well enough to justify a sequel. On July 18th, before the wide release of Star Trek Beyond, but after early word-of-mouth reviews and weekend tracking numbers were in, Paramount, Skydance, and Bad Robot formally announced Star Trek 4. This time, the story actually is something it by rights should have been with both previous movies, namely, ready in advance. The press release states, in the next installment of the epic space adventure, Chris Pine's Captain Kirk will cross paths with a man he never had a chance to meet, but whose legacy has haunted him since the day he was born, his father. Furthermore, the press release also confirmed that Chris Hemsworth, Chris Pine, and Zachary Quinto are on board for the fourth film, and that the remaining cast is expected to return, although new contracts will have to be signed with them. The part of Chekhov will however not be recast after Anton Yelchin's premature passing. The question is, why would they announce the sequel before the current movie opens and put so much emphasis on Hemsworth being in it? My hunch is that was a last-ditch effort to drum up excitement for Beyond, after tracking numbers didn't pick up the way they had hoped in the last couple of weeks of an honestly pretty unremarkable marketing campaign, which couldn't be further away from the great marketing the 2009 movie had. Be that as it may, announcing a movie is one thing, actually making it is another. Case in point, Abrams told Entertainment Weekly that the story for the fourth movie was his favorite one yet. Quote, "So one of the reasons I'm hoping Star Trek Beyond does well is so that we can, without question, get that movie made." End quote. Unfortunately for Abrams, there will indeed be questions about just that. There is no doubt a minimum amount Beyond will have to make for Paramount to greenlight Part 4, but what that number is remains unknown to any of us on the outside. For comparison, Paul Feig revealed that for Ghostbusters, a movie which cost less to make but more to market, that magic number was 500 million worldwide. Like Ghostbusters, Star Trek Beyond won't get anywhere near that number. If Star Trek Beyond had been a franchise starter, the numbers we're seeing here would likely have been the end of it. But Star Trek is Star Trek, and there is 5 decades worth of franchise where the catalog earnings spike every time a new installment comes out. That alone reduces the threshold for making another sequel. Another thing Star Trek Beyond seems to have going for it is that it did what Into Darkness failed to do, leave fans wanting more. That too might help tip the scales in its favor. Finally, Paramount hasn't got that many franchises to fall back on, and while underperforming, Star Trek Beyond is their biggest hit so far this year. That also counts for something. The numbers will decide though, and the final numbers won't be in for months yet. More Star Trek movies will no doubt be made, but if the next one ends up being the announced Star Trek 4 guest starring Hemsworth, or another reboot down the line, or even a future movie continuation of the in-development Star Trek Discovery TV series remains to be seen. If the announced sequel indeed does get the green light, it will be written by J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, the co-writers of Robert Orci, whose Star Trek 3 script Paramount rejected. Also, the movie could possibly be directed by J.J. Abrams himself, now that his tour of duty on Star Wars has ended. I gotta say though, I'm personally not overtly excited about the idea of bringing back either the late Kirk Sr. or by the writers. The magic lies in the execution, of course, so they could make the best Star Trek ever, in which case I'll be happy to eat my words. But after the positive fan reception to Star Trek Beyond, I think I'd be more excited about director Justin Lin and writers Simon Pigg and Doug Young returning for Part 4. Let me know what you think in the comments.
If you like this video, please hit that subscribe button. Join us for spin-free news and analysis of the happenings and corporate politics behind the scenes of your favorite genre movies, as well as explorations of your favorite characters and their backgrounds and context here at Midnight's Edge.